trust me, I get it. You're feeling the pressure to keep your faith separate from your work, worried that pursuing your God-given dreams might be seen as selfish or misguided. Here's what I've discovered. Our faith isn't a liability in our leadership. As a matter of fact, it's the source of our strength and wisdom. The real challenge is navigating how to boldly pursue our purpose while staying anchored in our faith. And that's exactly what the Beacon Show is all about. Each week, we bring you biblical wisdom and practical strategies from true beacons, Christian leaders who are illuminating the world. And it's also that you can let your light shine brighter and brighter. I'm Tamara Jackson, and this is The Beacon Show. Today, I'm excited to welcome my new friend, Pastor Heather, to The Beacon Show. Now, Pastor Heather has had an unexpected path from biological engineering to ministry leadership at National Community Church in Washington, D.C. Now, this church really impresses me because it embodies creative ways that God works. With a heart for discipleship and a mind trained in systems thinking, Pastor Heather brings unique insights to spiritual formation and church innovation. She leads initiatives like the Dream Collective, where they are helping to unleash the next generation of dreamers who long for revival in the church, reformation of the kingdom, and renaissance in culture. Her story challenges us to embrace unconventional paths and remain open to God's surprising ways of using our gifts and experiences for His glory. Enjoy. Well, Pastor Heather, welcome to the Beacon Show, where wisdom meets faith and success finds its voice. I have been looking forward to this conversation literally for months, and I am so honored. I'm so honored that you've taken time out of your schedule to be here to share a word of wisdom. Thank you for saying yes.
Oh, Tam, thank you for the invitation. I'm honored. It's a privilege. It's a joy to be with you today. Looking forward to our conversation.
It's going to be a good one. I have admired for quite some time the work that you do, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I know that you guys are out of the box thinkers. I would say a little cutting edge, and I love that about you. And I believe that the wisdom that you share is just going to help the next generation of leaders that are listening to us and watching us today. But as I share with you, I always like to kind of get a little bit of insight, and I find that others enjoy this too, just learning a little bit about the person, who they were as they grew up. So can you take us back in time, Pastor Heather? Tell us about what life was like for you growing up, and then we'll take it from there.
That's great. I love this. I was born in Mobile, Alabama. So grew up, I was born to Norval and Regina Sawyer. And my dad was a deacon in the Baptist church. My mom was a Sunday school teacher in the Baptist church. So I was kind of spit out right on the church pew. Do not recall a moment of life that didn't involve church, didn't involve faith, didn't involve Jesus. And I loved it. One of my earliest memories is my sister and I playing church. Now, most normal kids play house or play school. Yeah. We played church. So we would line up our stuffed animals in little chairs, and my sister would lead worship and I would preach. And that's one of my earliest memories.
You were preaching as a little one. You guys knew your role.
Was like a 5-year-old, right? So 4 years old preaching. So I one day, and on the other side of eternity, I'll get to hear back what some of those sermons made of him. But that was my young life, and I loved life in Mobile. I loved being a part of the church community, my school community. My first dream as a child in terms of my career is I wanted to be the first female Major League Baseball player. So that dream drove me for a while. That's what I wanted to do. And then at some point around the 7th grade, this might be way more about my childhood than you wanted to know.
Cool. I'm intrigued now.
When I was in the 7th grade, my parents took our family to Disney World. and we went to Epcot, which for middle school kids, Epcot is not the most exciting part of Disney World. And then we went to something called the Land Pavilion, which I've understood now is one of the least exciting parts of Epcot. But as we took that little boat ride through the Land Pavilion, for listeners that are familiar with this place, my heart and imagination were captivated by the work they were doing there. I saw a research project. It was joint research between NASA, USDA, and Epcot, Disney Imagineers, to design life support systems and sustainable agriculture for the space industry. And I decided, never mind, not going to be the first female Major League Baseball player. That's what I want to do with my life. So wound up going to LSU, studied biological engineering. And let me stop there, because I guess by the time you get to college, that's when your childhood's kind of over. But that's a snapshot of Heather Zempel.
Wow. So grew up in the church and loved it. You weren't that one that was like, oh, I hate this. You enjoyed it. And it sounds like there was a preview at age 5 of what was to come. But as you went to Epcot, you saw something, caught your eye, and you decided, this is the path that I'm going to go down. Now, I'm curious, at this point, did you have any inkling that you might be called to preach, or was that completely out of your sight?
No, that was kind of out of my sight. And part of that, and depending on, some of your listeners will relate to this. I grew up in a tradition where I didn't see women preaching or women pastoring or women leading. And but at the same time, had a pastor that was very, very affirming of my gifts and who I was, and gave me tremendous opportunities. The model that had been set for me was women on the mission field. Women overseas in my denomination could preach and lead with a little bit more freedom than maybe those stateside. And so I kind of thought at one point, well, maybe the Lord has gifted me and given me this interest in biological engineering, environmental engineering, so that I can go overseas, not as a missionary, but as an engineer, but in places where the gospel needs to find expression and an example. And so for a while, I thought maybe that's where God was leading me. I knew that my heart was to make disciples. Like, discipleship has always been kind of at the core of what God has placed inside me as is a passion. And so for many years, it was figuring out, how is God going to take this engineering passion and mindset and love, and then discipleship, and merge those
And
together.
merge them together. All right, got it. So at this point, you're just captivated by what you saw, and you go down this path. So you spend time at LSU, you graduate, and what happens next?
So I got my undergraduate degree at LSU, and then stayed on for another master's degree. So 2 more years there. And then I got a phone call that invited me to come to DC for 1 year to do a fellowship on Capitol Hill for Environment and Public Works Committee. So someone that actually had a degree in the science and the environmental world to do some research and have an experience on Capitol Hill. So I thought, that I can't pass that up. I've always been fascinated by the nation's capital, always been fascinated by history. And so I was like, I have no business being on Capitol Hill. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to take this opportunity to go learn and to be a part of that process. So moved to DC, and it was a big leap of faith, and found National Community Church. I said, I need to find a church, and I don't want to spend a lot of time looking for the perfect church. I'm just going to find a church that I can commit myself to for a year. And that's been the big game changer. So started working on Capitol Hill, started attending National Community Church, and then that's when life really started to change.
Wow. So isn't it funny, though, how God works? So, we know now that was, where you needed to be, but how you got to DC was on this short-term assignment. So at this point, where's your thought? I'm going to spend this year here, and I'm going to go back to Mobile, Alabama?
Well, a job had been offered to me in Nashville, Tennessee. And when I explained to them, I'm actually going to go to DC for a year, they said, well, come back and talk in a year. And so in the back of my head, I knew that at the end of this year, I'm going to Nashville, which I actually did. This makes the story a lot more long and convoluted. But at the end of my time in DC, was offered a full-time position on staff on Capitol Hill, but moved to Nashville to work for a consulting firm in environmental engineering. And then 2 years, and I thought, okay, I love my time in DC, but I'm trained as an engineer. So spent time in Nashville. 2 years later, and I won't go into that story because it'll just make a long story much longer, found myself moving back to DC to work on Capitol Hill again, at which point Pastor Mark Batterson, who is the lead pastor of National Community Church, asked if I would be willing to come on staff part-time to oversee small groups for 9 months. Some people have stories of being called into ministry.
Yeah.
I was just flat out tricked. Okay. Like, right. Some people
9
have,
months. That's all. Just 9 months.
yeah, like some people have Damascus Road moments. Some have writing on the wall. I agreed to 9 months, and here we are about 25 years later. Not quite that long, about 23. But here's the thing, Tam, and maybe this is what, I'm talking a lot about my own story. I think most of us, we know that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And we want God to give us a straight line to our destiny. But if we look at scripture, we look at history, God uses delays and detours and dead ends just as much as he uses clear vision and clear direction, if not more so. We find all the time, especially, well, actually, the Old Testament and New Testament, God using those things that we think are distractions from our calling to prepare us exactly for what he wants us to do and where he wants us to be. So looking back, I have this very convoluted journey. It's not a straight line, but at the same time, God has used every one of those things to prepare me for what he's invited me into now. And I'm so grateful for it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Like, do you feel like looking back, well, for example, when you took the job, the 2-year job in Nashville, do you feel like, man, maybe I misheard? Or it sounds like when you look back, you think, you know what? It was all a part of God's plan. And I needed all of those experiences for where I am now. Is that right?
Yeah. And if I'm honest, Tam, looking back on things, I think sometimes we wonder, when did I get it right? When did I get it wrong? When did I miss it? The reality is God will not waste a single experience in our lives, whether that was part of his sovereign plan or it's a part of redemption that he does to make it part of his sovereign plan. But when I look back at the Nashville experience, there were a couple of things that happened there. I started attending a church that was really, really dedicated to discipleship. And I met a guy there. His name is Dave Buring. He leads an organization called Lion Share Leadership. And his heartbeat was discipleship. And if the only reason I moved to Nashville for a couple of years was to connect with Dave Buring, was to connect with Belmont Church, was to connect with those small groups that shaped me and formed me and put me on a trajectory. So many of it's funny, Tam, whenever people from NCC hear Dave Buring speak, they think, oh, that's where Heather gets all of her material. Because his influence in my life was so profound. And the things that I learned about God's character and God's ways and how we partner in his mission. So, yeah, I think that time in Nashville was critical to my own spiritual development, but also getting the experience, not just academically as an engineer, but practically as an engineer, has given me tools and language and resources and paradigms for thinking about how spiritual formation happens. So I would say it's all part of what God has done to prepare me for where I am now.
Now that is intriguing. So what I'm hearing you say is all of your training as an engineer, even that is not wasted. You are literally using those skill sets in your work at the church. Okay. So before we get there though, so you take this 9-month assignment. How did we get from 9 months to staying on? Walk us through that.
Yeah. So Pastor Mark comes to me before I even moved back to DC. Hey, would you be willing to come on board part time? Help us with our small groups for 9 months. In 9 months, we're going to hire someone full time. So you're just filling a gap. Well, many of our small group leaders were friends of mine that I'd made in my first year in DC. So I was happy to jump in and use what I had learned in Nashville, bring some of that to be a blessing to NCC and some of that training that I had. So a few months in, though, Pastor Mark came to me and he said, Heather, I know I told you that we were going to hire someone in 9 months, but really, you're doing great. Do you want the job? And I said,
Should just stay on.
but no, like I'm already in between this tension of God, I'm trained as an engineer and from the 7th grade felt like this is what you called me to do. But now I also feel like it's an obedience to you that I'm back in DC on Capitol Hill. So which of these two roads do you want me to go down? And then you throw into this the curveball of why don't you come on staff and be a pastor at our church, for which I had no formal training, no experience. And I would say that wound up being about a 3-year journey for me. So I said, thanks, but no thanks, but I'm not going to leave you high and dry. So I will continue to work with our small groups until you find someone you'd like to hire. And then it got to a point where I was even saying, hey, how can I help you hire someone? How can I put together a job description or find some candidates? And about 3 years later, I realized I was really working 2 full-time jobs at that point. Because working on Capitol Hill is not, it's more than a full-time job. And then our small groups had grown to about 50 small groups. And so I said, this is becoming an integrity issue because I'm not doing a great job at either one. But I didn't have clear direction from the Lord. I fasted, I prayed, I sought counsel, and I didn't have clear direction. I was looking for that Damascus Road experience. I was looking for the writing on the wall. And so finally, I looked at where I was seeing the most fruit from my investment of time, talent, energy, where I was feeling the most fulfilled, like what's bringing me the most life in this season. And finally, and Tam, this might not sound very fun, very spiritual, but I was looking at where I was having the most fun because I actually embrace a theology of fun.
Theology of fun.
And I said, you know what? In this season, I'm seeing the most fruit, feeling most fulfilled, and having the most fun, doing what I'm doing at the church with discipleship and small groups. And so I said a yes that felt like a huge leap of faith. Because at that point, to leave the Hill, once you've left Capitol Hill and your network has dried up, how do you get back? And then my engineering, I still think very much in terms of those principles, but in terms of actually doing real life engineering design, I'm now 3.5 years removed from that. So it was a big leap of faith to jump over here, but I did it and I've never looked back.
You never look back. I love what you shared, though. I thank you for your transparency because it brings to light that there are times where you do all the right things. You prayed, you fasted, you did all the things, and there still was not the Heather, do this, which is what, I don't know about you, but that's what I would like. Tam, go this way, do this, right? And you did all those things and you still didn't get it. And then you've given us 3 things that might be helpful to our viewing and listening audience to consider. Is where you're seeing the most fruit. So God is giving you increase over what you're doing. So you're investing time, effort, and energy, but you're getting something out of it. You're feeling fulfilled. So you're actually enjoying the work that you're doing. And thirdly, you're having fun, which you and I talked about that earlier. That's an area of growth from. So, but I do believe that God wants us to have fun. Everything doesn't have to be serious all the time. God wants us to enjoy life. So those are three things that our viewing and listening audience maybe can consider. If you're at one of those points in your life where you're not sure, you've done all the things, maybe those are three things to look at. I love the combination of the two, because you did the spiritual practices, and then you also said, okay, practically, maybe I need to process through this a little bit, and came up with your little short list of the things that you could look at. And what's encouraging about that is that God clearly blessed you as you stepped out on faith, not knowing what would come of that. You were blessed as you moved forward. So thank you again for being honest and for sharing that with us, because I think that's a huge blessing. So you take this leap of faith, you say yes, you plug in. Is the job, now that you've fully committed, exciting and invigorating? Are you like on fire to do some great things, or what does it look like as you fully step into the role?
Well, when I first stepped in, I realized I have a lot to learn. And thankfully I had a lead pastor and a boss supervisor who really encouraged that. He said, "Heather, we do small groups right now to disciple people, but what I want you to do is embark on a journey of learning. Is that the best way to make disciples in our culture, in our generation, in the demographic space that we're in?" And so I was really given the opportunity to read a lot and learn a lot and do reconnaissance and just trying to take in everything I could and develop my own kind of theology, ecclesiology, leadership philosophy. And I'm a learner on Strength Finders. That's kind of my top strength. So that which is what discipleship is ultimately. It's being a learner. It's learning to live our lives from Jesus and inviting others to do the same. And so I felt like I just need to be a disciple who is learning to live my life from Jesus and then saying to other people, hey, I'm following Jesus. Do you want to come along the journey with me? And so I've enjoyed it, and the job has shifted over the years. It's been a bit of a evolution from what I was initially doing to now, but that discipleship is, I think, my first love, helping people find how to be students of Jesus' words, imitators of his ways, and then partners in his mission, regardless of what vocational expression we're in.
I love it. We've had conversations about this, and I think this is a great time to segue into that. I remember growing up in church. So I was in church from age 9 on. So I think you had a few years on me, but definitely remember being plugged in, church being a huge part of my life, and I'm tremendously thankful for it. At the same time, for me, it felt like you're operating in ministry when you have a church role. So that could be that you're speaking from the pulpit, or it could be that you're leading this committee or you're singing on the choir, but it didn't feel like there was a lot of room for you serving God through the work that you did every day. So it was like these were two separate pieces of your life. And one of the things that I appreciate about what you just said and the work that you guys do at NCC is there is an embracing of, no, these are two separate things, that God is working through you and in you, even in your work. So I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about that philosophy and how that manifests in some of the programming and the experiments, if you will, that you guys do to make sure that everyone feels like they have a place.
Absolutely. Well, when you look at the story of Scripture and the people that God uses, they are not the people that are in full-time religious work. It's not the pastors. It's political leaders, political advisors, shepherds, farmers, poets, and the list goes on. Particularly when we look at the Old Testament, the story of God is shaped not by religious leaders, often not by pastors or preachers, but people that are pursuing a vocation to the glory of God. I believe that we need, in our generation, in our culture specifically, followers of Jesus that are composing better music, writing better books, producing better films, drafting better legislation, starting better schools. The first command that God gave to humanity, we find it in Genesis 1, it's the cultural mandate. He says, go fill the empty places, lead creation, name creation, create new life, bring order to chaos. It's like God handed his entire creation to Adam and Eve and said, go make something of the world. And so in that cultural mandate, God challenged us to create a social world, start businesses, start families, start governments, start schools. We were authorized to explore and protect and harness the natural world, discover cures for diseases, plant crops, explore the highest mountain, the deepest valleys, the deepest oceans. We were invited in to create a cultural world, the arts, music, poetry, books. And so I believe that what God is doing, and I love on the last pages of scripture, Jesus says, I'm making all things new. We're at the end. We're at the end of the story, and he's still creating, and he's invited his followers to be a part of that process. This might be a good time too. I don't know, for those of you that are watching the podcast, you probably can only see the word criticize on my sweatshirt. I was like, oh no. The sweatshirt actually says criticize by creating, which is a quote from Michelangelo. And earlier today, I was speaking to a cohort that is in town on the topic of criticizing by creating. And so I guess my encouragement is that whatever you do, God has called you. He loves you and he sees you and he knows you, and he has appointed you and ordained you for the work that you do. And the work you do is your ministry. My job is to come alongside followers of Jesus that are on Capitol Hill, that are teachers, that are business leaders, that are entrepreneurs, and encourage them to go after the vision that God has given to them. And so we've got to, in my opinion, we've got to break out of this secular sacred divide, or those who are in ministry and those who are in the secular vocational field. We are all bringing glory to God as followers of Jesus by partnering with him in the co-creation of the world. So I don't even know where I was going with all that, Tam, but
that's okay. No, that's incredibly powerful. Maybe where you were going to go next is how that has influenced some of the experiments and the programs that you guys have done at NCC.
Absolutely.
Got you covered.
NCC is always, it's been a interesting place. So the first piece of property, for many years, we were meeting in movie theaters at metro stops around the DC area. The first piece of property we bought was at the corner of 2nd and F Street Northeast, a block from Union Station. And when we bought that property, and it was an old, like dilapidated, broken down, had been used as a crack house. We bought this property, and of course, what you do when you buy property as a church is you build a church building, right? That's what normal people do. Well, we decided to build a coffee house. And that was interesting for a lot of people, for our community, first and foremost. They're like, why is a church building a coffee house? And even our congregation, we meet in rented facilities on Sunday mornings. Why are we not building a church building? And we said, we don't feel like God has called us just to build a church, but first and foremost to bless a city. And so this gets at some of that even vocational calling, that we're not called to just, we're not just concerned about seating capacity on a Sunday morning, but sending capacity into the world for the sake of the good news and for the sake of our neighbors. So we've always believed that the church belongs in the middle of the marketplace. That has taken the form of building businesses mission, unleashing entrepreneurs in our congregation to build kingdom ventures and missional businesses. We've met in marketplace environments, and now we build marketplace environments. We believe the church ought to be the most creative place on the planet, that God first revealed himself to us as creator and part of the Imago Dei. And this is where I was going on and on about the cultural mandate. We've been called and invited in to partner with him in the co-creation of the world. I would also say, and some of this comes from Paul Gould in cultural apologetics, but in a post-Christian context, beauty is the apologetic and artists are the evangelists. So how do we unleash our artists and our creatives to tell the gospel story in our culture? We believe the church ought to be the most diverse place on the planet. And that comes in every form of the word diversity that you can think. We want people of different generations involved, people of different race and ethnicities involved. We want men and women that are created co-equals to co-lead the family of God. And then fourth, we believe that God will bless us in proportion to how we give to missions and care for those in our city. So those are core convictions that drive us, and it's led to, we also believe that there are ways of doing church no one's thought of before. So allowing those four things to guide us, whether it's redemptive real estate or launching businesses mission or doing things in creative ways, that's where we find the energy and the life and the blessing of God in our context.
I love all that you shared, but something caught my attention as you were going through that. We believe that there are ways to do church that have never been done before. Tell me about that. I'm curious. What does that look like in terms of how you guys come together as a team and the work that you do? How does that influence it? I guess I should say.
Absolutely. We never want to be the people that get caught in the it's never been done that way before. That when we look at the New Testament, Paul is constantly moving into new territory, doing things that a Jewish person trained under the most conservative Jewish rabbis would have thought God doesn't work that way. And yet he's pushing into Gentile territory. He's calling Jews and Gentiles to come to a table together, even though there are a lot of barriers to getting them together. So we never want to be the people that say, well, God wouldn't do it that way, or it's never been done that way before. I think building Ebenezer's Coffee House at the corner of 2nd F Street Northeast is a great example of that. We said don't want to just build a church building. We want to build a place where the church and the community can cross paths in a way that's very natural and organic. We want to be a church that can be a solution to the problems in our city. So how can we position and posture ourselves so that we can be a blessing to our neighbors around us? We've always wanted to lean into creativity to tell gospel stories. When we were meeting in movie theaters, we're like, how do we use the movie screen to tell the gospel story in moving pictures in a similar way that stained glass told the story of the gospel in stained glass in the medieval era? And so we're always just trying to ask the question, God, what are you up to? What are you doing? And how can we catch up to where you are?
I love it. Like I said at the beginning, I love how you guys are constantly, like, it sounds like there's this intentional, how can we do it differently? Or what else is there? Maybe that's another way to say, what else is there? Well, okay, we're doing this, but what else is there? Because God is creative, to your point. And so we want to lean into that creativity and open ourselves up to. I think that's another thing that I'm hearing is just being open to, there could be a different way to do this than how we're doing it now. And what would that look like? And exploring what that could look like. One of the things that comes to mind is, I think it's called the Dream Collective. I'd love for you to spend just a few minutes talking to us about that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, this is probably our biggest experiment to date in terms of doing something different. A few years ago, we started realizing that a lot of churches had been launched from the soil of our community, whether campus pastors or others that say, you know what, I feel called to pastor my own church. We also saw that there were a lot of entrepreneurs coming out of our community wanting to launch businesses or redemptive ventures, and there was something in the water, there was something in the soil of our community that was causing dreamers to go after these experiments, to go after this way of doing church or a way of being the community, being the people of God that maybe hadn't been thought of before. And so we thought, how do we do more things like that? Instead of just we accidentally plant some churches or see some businesses launched, how do we become more intentional about that? And so we said, let's do more things that don't have our name on it. let's do more things that we don't get credit for, that we don't control. And we launched something called the Dream Collective. We realized that really all of us are the answer to a prayer. Like none of the dreams that we have began with us. All of the blessings that we walk in are actually the answers to a prayer that somebody that came before us prayed. And so we want to then give a blessing and a birthright to the next generation of dreamers. So we launched Dream Collective, and we want to inspire dreamers who long for revival in the church, reformation in the kingdom, and renaissance in culture in order to advance kingdom ideas. They don't have our name on them, don't have us controlling them, don't have us getting credit for them, but we can get behind them and encourage, equip, and inspire. So we launched it about 3 years ago. And though there are kind of three big buckets of people that we work with. One is the church planner, one is the entrepreneur, and the other is the artist. And a lot of times what we're finding is that it's a convergence of several of those ideas. We're working with a lot of church planners who would also identify as, well, I'm also an artist, I'm also entrepreneurial. And so we do gatherings that inspire, we do networks that equip, and we deploy resources that implement. And so while discipleship is still my heartbeat, leading this Dream Collective team, designing, desire pathing, building this is what I'm currently giving my life to.
Now, you used the word design, and it struck me. I said, I wonder, I want to ask this question. Help us with how, because someone may be in a career right now, like engineering or architecture or something like that, and they're trying to reconcile, okay, how can God use this? Can you give us some examples of how you're using your engineering background, even in the work that you're doing now?
Oh, absolutely. Well, for me, there are so many metaphors and frameworks. Like when I think about biological engineering and how biological systems work, that gave me so much insight into how spiritual formation works. Because a lot of times we approach spiritual formation almost more like mechanical engineering, where you follow the formula A, B, C, D, and then this is gonna happen. And you know that when you build with steel or you build with iron, like it's always going to respond the same way to certain pressures, tensions, or shearing stresses. Biological systems operate very differently. I think a lot of times in the church, we try to manufacture spiritual formation when really we have to cultivate environments where spiritual formation can respond to the variables in the ecosystem that it's in. So it's given me so many paradigms for how to understand discipleship and formation. But also, I believe that architects and engineers and fashion designers and those that are in the creative world, as I mentioned earlier, and I think in a post-Christian context, beauty is the apologetic and artists are the evangelists. The way spaces are designed, the way experiences are built, the way that like even right now we're sitting in a building that the way it's designed helps people, I believe, find their way back to God because of the way that we use art or that we use the architecture to draw people into an experience. So no matter what your vocation is, no matter what your gift is, God is going to use that for His glory. And sometimes that's kind of in metaphorical ways, like I said, giving me systems or processes or frameworks for understanding how He's working. Sometimes it's just the hard skills of saying, look, you can use your gifts and your talents and your abilities to help the people of God create spaces that help people find their way back.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm always amazed at how quickly this time goes. So we'll hit on two other things, and then we'll let you get back to the work. I'm curious, when you hear the word legacy, Pastor Heather, do you think about that a lot, or is it not a big deal for you? I'm just curious from your point of view, how important is legacy?
Yeah, it's really important to me. In fact, that word's been one that I've kind of uh, thought about for a long time. And for me, it goes back to discipleship. It's not legacy for my own name or for my own sake, but for the gospel. 2 Timothy 2:2 is probably my life verse. It's when Paul says to Timothy, the things that you've heard me teach amongst reliable witnesses, teach to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. It's always struck me that in that moment, Paul is at the end of his life, and he's not thinking just about Timothy and the investment he's made in Timothy. He's thinking about the investment that Timothy will make in the next person and the investment that person will make in the next person. And the fact that we're sitting here today having this conversation in large part because Paul and Timothy were crazy enough to think this can actually work. It's people investing their life into the next life, into the next life, into the next life. And so I've always had a huge heart for next generation, for young adults, for young leaders, encouraging them to develop the character they need to sustain the calling that God has put on their lives. And I would hope that my legacy would be that I saw things in people they didn't see in themselves and encourage them to go after a dream that was bigger than they could have imagined, and to encourage them that following Jesus is worth it all. So that when I think about legacy, those are some of the things I think about.
I love it. I'd love for you to now just spend a few minutes speaking into the life of that dreamer that's watching us, that's listening to us right now. They have big dreams, but they might not quite understand how it's all going to come together. Can you speak a word of encouragement for them as we wrap up?
Yeah. Well, first, I just would reiterate that God sees you and he knows you and he loves you and he designed you and he wants you to get where he wants you to go even more than you do. So I would say practice prophetic imagination. See things not just as they are, but as they could be. And let the Spirit of God show you the path ahead. Again, criticize by creating. When you encounter things that you just want to speak out against, find a way to introduce something into the world that is good and true and beautiful. I would say see obstacles as opportunities, delays, detours, dead ends. They are not obstacles to the path, they are the path. And God will get you where he wants you to go. And I would just say, remember that we're better together. So don't go at it alone. Find community, find mentors, find people you can mentor, and pursue your dream in community with other people.
Pastor Heather, thank you so much for being here with us today. This has been so fun. And I've learned a lot from you, and I know our viewing and listening audience has been blessed. Certainly want to wish you God's best, and as well as the rest of the team at NCC as you move forward with all of your fun and creative projects and the Dream Collective. Thank you again for being here with us today. We appreciate you.
Tam, thank you so much for inviting me, and blessings to you and all your listeners.